Hello, everyone. My name is Rita Marsh, and I'm with the Center for Human Flourishing in Carbondale, Colorado. And today I have the pleasure of introducing my good friend and colleague, Barbe Chambliss, Dr. Barbe Chambliss, who's going to be speaking today about her book, Women Peacemakers, What We Can Learn from Them. And I'm going to share screen here and let Barbe begin telling you her story. Barbe.
All right, I'm here. Thank you so much, Rita, and thank you, Becky, and thank you to the whole 99 days of peace, I have to say. What I would like to do today is I've spent 30 years interviewing women peacemakers all over the world. I did it initially for my PhD, and then I got enamored with the joy of actually sitting with these women, ordinary women who are doing extraordinary acts of peacemaking, and kept interviewing. And 15 of the 60 interviews that I've done have been put into this book, Women Peacemakers, What We Can Learn from Them. And I will say they're not the top 15. There is no such thing. Each of these women has a story unto herself that is touching, that is such a mentoring story for anybody that wants to learn how to do what I call a conscious peacemaking act. And a little bit further in the presentation, you'll understand what I mean, conscious versus spontaneous peacemaking. So let me see if I can, there's going to be two parts to this presentation. One is the women peacemakers. I'm going to introduce you to 3 or 4 of them. And then we're going to take a chunk of time at the end for the latter part of the title, what we can learn from them. It was such a joy to interview these women that I kind of stopped there and thought, I just need to tell the world about these women. And then I went like, you have a bountiful supply of information about a kind of peacemaking that isn't very well known in the world. That in itself is probably the real gem, the real value of your interviews and of this book. So let's see, the next one, Rita, we can talk a little bit more about my story. Sometimes people want to know how I found the women and how I had enough money to interview them all and things like that. So here's a little bit about that. So thanks to the guidance of a dissertation committee, they said, you know, Barb, if you're going to do a dissertation on peacemaking, you better define peacemaking. What is it? And that was a little, there were so many definitions of it, and some of them were so boring and some of them were so inaccurate. Like one definition was the name of a rifle. It was a peacemaker because it would shoot everybody else. And I went like, I got to do better than that. And I knew that I was going to interview women all over the world and that they would have all the languages from all over the world. So I decided I would do a definition of peace that would fit in all cultures. So I did it with my hands. And I don't think you can you see my hand? Yes, in the small pictures.
Can you, if you stop sharing for a second, then we can see you a little bit better.
Okay.
There we go. Yes.
So my definition of peace is this, and it's this because these hands are equal. And by equal, we mean equal in respect. We mean equal opportunities. We mean equal guidance, I will say. This is not peace because there's a dominant and a subordinate element to it. So I would simply say to people, like there was a group of Irishmen playing in our nearby town, and I went backstage after the performance and I said, it was a great performance. And I'm doing a dissertation on women peacemakers. Do you know of any women in Ireland? If this is peace and this is not, do you know of any women in Ireland that are making this happen? And the answer to at that moment was, oh, no, we're just the musicians. We don't know nothing about that. But we have a sister Fanula that is a disc jockey. Here's her telephone number. And that actually was how I got my very first nomination for a woman. And so the next morning I cold called Fanula, and she had 2 peacemakers for me. And I'll tell you, at that time, it was way pre-cell phone times. I had a huge telephone bill at that time. But, and I realized that, you know, you can call cold to people and then it gets easier and easier and easier. So I'm pretty good at cold calling. So I got several different nominations that way. And when I could, I was going to graduate school and they let me put my dissertation or my tuition on a credit card, and I put it on a mileage plus credit card. So whenever I accrued enough miles, I would go interview people. Or if I accrued enough for me and one of my kids, I wanted my kids to understand peacemaking too. So when I had enough miles, I would take my 9-year-old to Ireland, to Israel, to Croatia. I took my 21-year-old to Tanzania and to South Africa. And some of these women actually I heard about, and they were American, or they might have been traveling through the United States. One woman from East Timor was trying to get people to understand the East Timor War. So as she came through, I interviewed her. So each connection was quite different and quite lovely. And the committee said, you know, that's all great, Barb, but it's not very academic. These random people telling you that they think XYZ fits your hand thing. So what we want is for you to get 2 nominations for every woman. We want you to get a nomination from someone else, and we want you to get a nomination from the woman. And I thought, not a problem, piece of cake. Well, I was really wrong. I would, for instance, Sister Sarah, well, when I talked to Fanula, she gave me Bernadette Devlin, who was the youngest member of the parliament when all the Irish and the English horrible happenings were there. And the other one was a woman named Sister Sarah Clark. So I interviewed Sister Sarah first, and she let me know she didn't want to be called a peacemaker. Well, she didn't say I don't want it. She said, actually, I'm just a nun doing my job. And so I thought, whoa, my committee is going to keep pushing me on this. I better find a way to get them to identify themselves as peacemakers, because otherwise all these interviews will be great stories, but they will not have any impact to all of the violent stories that are so plentiful in our world. So I was thinking about how to do this, and my high school son said to me, Mom, look, ask them their definition of peace, and then ask them if the work they do does anything to bring that about. Well, that was miraculous too. So I would do that, and I would start my interviews with, what's your definition of peace, and what's your story about that? Do you contribute to that? And they would go, well, I said, well, if that's your definition and this is what you're doing, and you say that it does contribute to that definition, what do you think about being a peacemaker? And I would literally wait sometimes for 2 or 3 minutes. And I would watch the demeanor on their faces change to where they went like, okay, I guess I'm a peacemaker. And I didn't realize how important that was at the time. But because I want peacemaking in the world, I want people who are doing amazing acts of peacemaking. I want them to stand up in the mantle of peacemaking so that we've got some purchase on all the violence making that is easily identified in the world. So, Rita, let's go back to putting me big, because I want to do the rest of that definition. So these women do not, if this is peace and this is not, These women never went about making things equal by doing this or by doing this. This kind of peacemaking happens this way. It usually starts with one person looking around and seeing something that is not fair, isn't just, doesn't feel equal, and they dedicate themselves to finding out if that other person would like to have some equality. And if the answer is yes, or if the obvious answer is yes, some people that are on the other side of this are so beleaguered, they don't have enough to eat, they don't have enough power, they don't have, they can't even see the difference between their power struggles. And so it becomes pretty obvious that this would be a good thing to do. So so this is the kind, it's never done for people, it's done with them. And it's never pressed on them. And I'm going to give you some examples with 2 or 3 of the women about how it happened. So the 3 women I think I'd like to tell you about, one was an American woman named Connie Ning. Connie was from Evergreen, Colorado. She was a psychotherapist, and she had a batch of children that she was raising, and she thought life was pretty good like that. But her husband had been in the Vietnamese War as a medic. And after the war was over, he wanted to go back and see the orphanages where he had worked. And Connie thought, well, that's great. I'd like to go there too. So they made a trip together. It was tricky because at that time there were no diplomatic relations between the US and Vietnam, but they went over and they entered a hospital. And as Connie walked in, she saw a woman and her husband sitting on a bench. And the woman was dying of ovarian cancer. And in tremendous pain. There were no pain meds at all at that time. And Connie just looked her in the eye and knew that her life was going to change right then. She could not let this disparity of drugs, of medical services, of hospital services in Vietnam, created by a war that we participated in very strongly. She couldn't walk away from that. So she came home and she started sending medical equipment over. Her husband helped her find out that surgery packages, if you open a surgery package and you don't use the whole thing, it gets thrown away. She thought, well, that's crazy. So she collected medication. She collected surgery stuff. She collected doctors. So she sent doctors over and she brought Vietnamese doctors over. And finally, she really got quite a program going in Vietnam. And she decided, she thought, well, I'm just not making any difference here. And so someone said, well, how could you make a difference? She said, well, the big ground problem in this area is not medication, it's poverty. How do we get this country out of poverty? Because they can't, even if we could lift them up, they can't stay up if they're too hungry or too poor or too ill. So she did early microloans. And she said they did it all wrong in the beginning. They had no idea. They lent all the money to men. They didn't ask for any return of the money. And she just said it was really funny how they thought it was a good idea and it wasn't. But right about that time, the Grameen Bank got the Nobel Peace Prize. So she went and studied how the Grameen Bank worked and started issuing microloans to the Vietnamese women, and it became very successful at raising them up financially. And it got so successful that the Vietnamese government said, you know what, we'll take this over now. Thank you very much. So Connie went like, whoa. But right about that time, Connie and her husband went to, took their kids to Guatemala for Christmas. And they were around Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. And Connie recognized that once again, she was seeing poverty. The Mayan women had been subjected to a major genocide. Once again, with the United States being a perpetrator in many ways of that. And she said, well, I wonder how about giving these Mayan women some microloans. And it went successful, became successful. They started having enough money to do a tienda of the blouses that they made, or of milk to sell. And then Connie thought, you know what, even this isn't quite enough. So we're gonna, what I'd like to do is tell them if they pay back their first loan, they can have a second loan. And if they take out a second loan, we'll educate their elementary school kids. None of these women had been educated at all. It just wasn't in their culture, and they were so poor working on the farms. So she started educating their kids. And then the kids went up through 6th grade, and they went like, whoa, we want to go on. So they had to educate them at the middle school level. And Connie kept right up with them. And she said, all right, now we're going to educate you at high school levels. And then she said, well, we can't stop there. So they are now educating. She and her husband have an organization called the Quetzal Foundation. And they are raising scholarship money so Mayan girls can go to college. And it's a trick and a half for that to happen. It's not just getting tuition. It means traveling. It means living in a village, but traveling on the weekends to get the education. It means graduating with degrees that they then take back to their villages. And that's why this is the quote that we pulled. Forget the incremental change stuff. These women are leaping over 4 to 5 generations. Can the daughter of an illiterate single mother become a physician? We think so. And we are going to find out what happens when she does. So Connie's story is such a role model for how to do this. So another woman I'd like to tell you about is Sister Mary Vertucci. As a little girl, Mary Vertucci wanted to be a nun. She knew right off the bat she wanted to be a nun, but she didn't want to be a nun like the ones that taught in her school. She wanted to be a Mary Knoll nun because she was a pretty adventuresome lady, and the Mary Knoll nuns are all assigned outside of the United States. She got assigned to Tanzania, and she taught several courses to high school kids there, but she got to know the Maasai people that are the pastoral people. And she got knowing that they, even though Tanzania requires every student get an education, they simply couldn't get the education because they were so far away from the schools. And they were pastoral. They would move with the cows. So even if they built a school, the kids weren't often close enough to it. So Sister Mary decided that there were several problems. One is the location of the school. Another was the kids only knew how to speak Ma, their language of the Maasai. And the schools were in English for the upper schools and in Swahili for the middle schools. So they had a language barrier she had to help them over with. So she started on a wing and a prayer. And she set up, when I interviewed her, it was the first, I think, 8 months of her program. And she called the program Imusoi because it's the Maasai world for what was going on at Sister Mary's school. And there was I interviewed her in a little room that had a kitchen, a dorm room with 4 bunk beds in it, even though she had 6 girls, because some of them slept head to toe. And then there was a classroom. And she did most of the teaching herself. And the trick was how to get the girls to come to the school. Well, the mothers wanted the girls to come to the schools. The fathers did not, because it was tradition for the young girls at, say, 11 or so to go through the ritual cutting of their genital. And after that, they became mothers. They became married. And when a young girl got married, the father received cows. So it was a means of wealth for the fathers. So the mothers were going like, we don't want our girls to grow up with the same things we did. We want something more for them. And the fathers were going, I don't think so. And so sometimes Sister Mary would be driving their borrowed Range Rover out into the sticks at midnight. The mother would put the girl in the car, and the mother would go back knowing she would catch it. She would catch trouble the next day because the father would no longer have the cows that he was hoping at the wedding. And so one of the beautiful things about Sister Mary, I want to tell you this. I mean, remember I told you that this kind of peacemaking doesn't happen for people, but it happens with them. So I want to read you. I asked how Sister Mary worked with, how she worked with these girls. I mean, she could have said, look, I think what you need to do is be a teacher. There's teachers needed back in your schools, or I think you need to be a guide or a bookkeeper because your villages need this. She never ever did that. She introduced these girls to lots of women that had different jobs. And I'm going to see if I can tell you exactly what she said to them. If I can't find it right here, I'll read it to you. She said, I would ask the child, the young girl, 11, 12, 13, what path she was drawn to. And then I would encourage that person to move down that path that was beckoning. I would warn them they will meet obstacles. Sometimes they'll be hurt and discouraged. But whatever you're drawn to, keep seeking it. And you will not only do the work, but you will have much greater knowledge of who you are. If you really seek who you are in a mutually loving way, the path will open out. I would encourage you as a student to move in that direction, and you will find happiness in whatever you do. So she raised these girls up to realize that they had a heart. They had a part of themselves that really wanted something. And then she would help them go get that. And at this point, I think she's got like 1,500 students that she's helped. And she's not only helping the Maasai now, she's helping other indigenous girls that never, ever would have had any chance for education. So the third woman I'd like to introduce you to is a woman named Ruchama Marton. Ruchama is quite a woman. Let me just tell you this. Ruchama is now older than I am by a few years. She's in her 80s. And that means that she was born, and actually she was in Israel before it became a state. And one of the most beautiful things ever was when she said, I'd like to tell you, I said, well, what was your life like, when you were a child? And she said, I just want to read this to you because I just love it. She said, I was born and brought up in Jerusalem. It was, of course, before 1948, and it was a village at the time. Now, as I read this, think about what comes across to us in the news about Israel and Palestinians. But Jerusalem was a very small town. It wasn't even a city. It was extremely nice, and then she said quietly, which then disappeared. And then she said, oh, never mind. But she did go on. She said, part of this neighborhood, Ruchama's grandmother had made a vow when she ended up living in Israel that she would go to the Wailing Wall every Saturday. And when Ruchama got old enough, she took her with her to the Wailing Wall. Part of this neighborhood was Jews who were born to Jerusalem from Sephardic origins, so different from my parents and the European descent Jews. Next to them were the most religious Jews. There's no one in the world more religious than those people were. All these neighborhoods were so close, 3, 4, 5 minutes from walking from each other. On the north side, there was a whole neighborhood of people who came from Eastern Europe. And in another corner, people came from Kurdistan, Jews, all of them, so different. different origins, different songs, different languages, different clothing, and different food. Even their religions were different from those, even though it was all Judaic. And then in less than 20 minutes, there were Palestinians. At least 6 or 7 very different communities living in the same small town. There was no love, but there was no hatred. We were all just together like this, being our own different selves. And then, so I said to her, so is this your point of reference for the world now? And she said, absolutely. This is what life should be like. And I experienced it. This is not an idea in heaven. It is not such a naive way of looking at things. I was there. For 9 years, I was there. So I know this kind of life is possible. So she then became 18, and at 18, women have to go into the military. They do military duty just like the men. And when she was away at the military, she actually had a commander that was one of the heroes of Israel. But what she saw this commander do shocked her and upset her terribly, enough that she had to go home early from the military assignment. And she said that behavior was not human, was not kind, was not equal. And she finished her military duty, but then she went on to become a psychiatrist. She wanted to know why people did what they did. And then there are these series of wars that happened in Israel at that time. And she began to wonder what was going on. There'd be military duty that would take soldiers out and then they'd come back. And she'd go like, well, what's going on out there? Are people out there being with their wounds being attended to or what? So she got a group of 7 physicians. They went out after there would be a skirmish or a war. And they found that there was a lot that went on out there. There were no hospitals. So there were people with broken arms. There were people with concussions. And what she said, they discovered one time a pattern where Jewish soldiers would go in, the Israeli soldiers would go in, and one would hold the wrist of a Palestinian soldier, one would hold the armpit, and the other would bring the gun down in the hand, so they break the arm that could carry a gun. And they were brutal, and it really upset her. It made her mad. So she formed a group called I'll think of it in just a minute here. I think the first name was different than the name it is now, but it was a group of physicians that volunteered to go out and not only look at the medical situation, but look at the human rights situation. And when there was a bad human rights violation, Ruchama took it to court. And she was a strong believer that reparations was good for both sides. She said she had a lot of trouble getting the Palestinians to accept the reparations because there was such a power differential between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but she helped them stand up in court and say, this would be good for both of you. So one of Ruchama's really strong pieces, well, I will say right now, Ruchama, after she was 80, she said, we can't do this alone. We need outside help. So, but in the meantime, she had gathered a cadre of 1,500 people that go out to the non-urban areas, and they make sure that there is medication, that there's medical care. I think they were responsible for a lot of the COVID dissemination of the vaccines. And it's not just to Palestinians. It's to the Druze, it's to the Christians, it's to the prisoners, it's to the refugees. They make sure that everyone has healthcare there. So there are 3 of these phenomenal women that I wanted to tell you about. And I'll just briefly tell you about a 4th woman, a woman named Judith Genya. Oh, wait, stop, hang on just a minute. Because this quote from Ruchama is probably the pivot piece for what I am now teaching in terms of peacemaking, what I learned from all of these women. She says, it is when peace is made, it is a synonym for respect, because when people respect each other, they're willing to share power. Now think about that. I don't think power is being shared in Israel today. And I will tell you that one thing I've learned is that there are two doors. We all have the ability and the propensity to go be peacemakers and to be war makers. It's up to us when we set foot on track of an action. If we open the door of respect, we are on the path to peace. If we open the door of humiliation, we're on the path to violence. And our job is to make the decision about which path we're going to go on. So Ruchama's wisdom has been really pivotal for me. A fourth woman that I wanted to introduce you to was, I had a lot of friends who knew what I was doing, and they would like send me stuff in my mailbox. So I went out to my mailbox one day, and there was a fundraising request from this woman. Her name is Judith Genya. And it said, I'm going to work with the Bosnian refugee kids, even though this war is just barely over. And can you donate anything to help me work with them? So I'd really been bothered by the Bosnian War, and there was so little written or told about the Bosnian War in the United States. All I knew was that it was bad. Something was not good about it. So I just called her up, my cold call skills. And I said, well, she was from Los Angeles. And I said, I don't have a whole lot of money to donate, but if you're holding a camp for these kids, I could come to Los Angeles and I could cook in your camp, or maybe I could help with some other aspect of it. And she said, you're on. That's what this work is all about. It's all about volunteering. And she said, but I just need to let you know, this camp is not in Los Angeles, it's in Croatia. So I ended up being a counselor in the camp with 80 Bosnian kids that had barely made it through the war. The peace accord was in February, and I was in Bosnia in August. And that experience, I mean, an American woman rarely sees war, really experiences it. The men do, they get shipped abroad as soldiers, but women in America only know about war. By the time I left and I'd seen how the war impacted these children, how it impacted their cities, how it impacted their fear, how it impacted their hope for the future, I went like, I can't pretend this is an academic exercise anymore. I need to wake up the peacemaker in as many people as I can. So that was a big turning point for me. So I took the book, The Women's Stories, and I did 3 extra chapters at the end of it. So there are 15 stories of 15 women. Chapter 16 is the answer to the question I asked every woman, which is, what advice would you give a peacemaker? And then there was a question that, so I wrote all of their answers down verbatim. And then I hung all of their interviews up around a big room that I was in. And I looked at them and I said, what's similar about how all the women are very different, the places they live in are very different, but what is similar about how they do their work? And so chapter 17 in the book basically helped me design this definition of this kind of peacemaking. And every word that's underlined here is really critical. It's a conscious act of working alongside another. Not pulling, not pushing, but working alongside another to level the playing field of opportunities so that that person can empower themselves into a place of equal choices and equal respect. Again, you don't do it for them. You just companion them, helping them take advantage of opportunities that might be out there, whatever it takes for them to be equally respected and empowered to where you are. Again, a conscious act of working alongside another to level the playing field. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the difference between a conscious and a spontaneous act of peacemaking. Let's pretend that you're a 5th grader in school, and you're pretty popular, you're a good athlete, smart kid, teachers like you, kids like you, and you are sitting at a table for lunch with a bunch of popular kids. But one day you're late coming out of a classroom, and so you come out of the cafeteria and you go, whoa, there are no seats at that table. So I really want to get out there and play basketball. So I think I'll go find a seat. So you go over to a table that's got not only one seat, but lots of seats. And you plop down and you start eating your lunch, and you're across the table from a kid, and you start a conversation about the Olympics that happened to be on television. And it's a kind of a cool conversation between the two of you. So you pick up your dishes to go take them to the dishwasher, and the kid on the other side of the table says, "Thank you for sitting here. Nobody sat here all year." And you go like, whoa, that's right. I do remember out of the corner of my eye seeing one kid sitting at this table. Ah, and he said, "Well, I had a good time eating with you. See you outside." And you leave. That is a spontaneous act of peacemaking. When it becomes conscious is the next day when the popular kid walks out of the cafeteria and makes a decision where to sit. So there are tons of spontaneous peacemaking acts going on all over. And the more we recognize them and call them what they are, the better. But the conscious ones are people who decide every day that they're going to stick with a peacemaking project, come hell or high water. So just a quick way to plot this in the academic world. Most people, when they're doing a dissertation, they take a theory and then they go do data collection, and they either prove or disprove their theory. I kind of did it backwards. I just knew that I was interested in women. I was not women as power makers, but women as peacemakers. So I went and did all these interviews. Then I had to go find a theorist that fitted so I could look academic for my dissertation. And I looked and looked and looked, and the person that fit it the best was a guy from England, a Brit, named Adam Curl. And I cold called him, said, "I just found this book of yours. Can you talk to me more about your philosophy of this?" And he said, "I can, but I have to tell you, I only have 10 minutes because I'm headed to the hospital. They're coming to pick me up." And he didn't live much longer than this conversation. So this was in his book. And let's see if I can explain it to you. If you look at number 1 in the lower right-hand corner, this is the level that most of the women are working at. This is where people don't even understand how oppressed that they are. They're so busy trying to eat or stay alive or whatever it is that they can't see the bigger picture. You can, maybe. You can see that it's not right, but they're going like, "Oh, could you just give me a meal?" And in this level of work, it's mostly done by the education, like Sister Mary educating the Maasai kids. If that happens successfully, and I will say, if you look at the right-hand side, there's the word static. This is a fairly static kind of peace because the people at the top of that are in charge, in power, they don't want movement down here. They kind of like it the way it is, stuck, static. If they get enough education and begin to see the bigger picture, they move up to square number 2, and that's where they go like, "Hey, this doesn't feel right." And there are various techniques of confrontation aimed at reducing the imbalances. It could be a dispute. It could be a march. It could be a union, holding forth and saying, we're not going to go to work today. And that was where peace and stuff gets unstable, because the power structure is getting threatened. If you move over to square number 3, and there's more power in the oppressed people, it moves to something called negotiation. And this is where you can at least sit down at a bargaining table. Both sides have enough power to keep it fairly civil. And if that works, you move up to square 4, which is sustainable peace. Although we all know that peace is never rigid, it goes like this, but it's got people who respect each other and can sit down at a table and negotiate with each other. If you look at the far left, there's the number 2, 3, and 4 are what everybody calls the grassroots level. I call what these women are doing the tree roots level because it's even deeper than the grassroots. So, Rita, we could probably go to the next slide. What I want to talk to you about now is what I did learn from these women and why I want to just visit why should anybody do this kind of peacemaking? How do you do it? How do you pay for it? Things like that. So let's just look at a few ideas about why this is a good kind of peacemaking to do. And some of these are really simple and some of these are fairly complicated. Why do it? Because it works. I couldn't have interviewed 60 women randomly in the world who are doing this kind of work and found anything but success. If I found that much of success, this kind of peacemaking works. Second of all, it's regenerative. And my definition of regenerative is that you leave a place in better shape than when you arrived. And that's almost always true of these. I mean, one little saying I've often said is you don't have to be famous to be unforgettable. When people are working like this together, the bond between the two of them, the sense that you have done something in this world that is good, the friend that you make in this person is so empowering to both the peacemaker and the recipient. I would also say number 3, it changes things at both the individual and the systems level. You put one Maasai girl in school and pretty soon you've got 1,500 of them educated and making choices about how to go back and help their people. The same with the Guatemalan kids. Another woman I interviewed was suing an employer in Bangkok for bad health conditions in the workplace. And she finally ended up having a suit with over 300 people, even though it was just her problem in the beginning. It is reciprocally uplifting, as I said before, because you can't be involved in this work without being valued by someone else, and that value is palpable. It also balances out the multiple acts of violence in the media, but mostly it balances them out if we say that we're peacemakers. I mean, you're going to hear later that I teach high school kids how to do this kind of peacemaking, and I just talked at their graduation. And the last thing I said to them was, look, you've studied peacemaking, you know how it works, go out there and do it, but most of all, put it on your resume. You can say that you're a neuroscientist or you're a mother or whatever, but also add peacemaker to that so that people go like, oh, peacemaker. So there are a few more. Rita, let's go to the next slide. Reasons to do this. It's a win-win rather than a win-lose. I mean, it's amazing how deep competition is in our culture. But there's just no competition with this. It's a joint ride. So nobody goes away mad. I did some studying trying to figure out why so many British colonialists led other countries like in South Africa and places like that in such a power-hungry way. And it's because their school systems were very win-lose. The sports were, the academics were, things like that. So this kind of peacemaking is definitely a win-win rather than a win-lose. Another reason to do it is because if we don't do it, who will? And if we listen to Ruchama Marton, she says when people respect each other, they are willing to share power. This means ultimately this kind of peacemaking has the potential to make war irrelevant. And then according to clan mother, I interviewed a clan mother up at Standing Rock. And basically what she basically says is, this has been known to Indigenous people for a long time. There are 5 different eons of power in our history. The first, and these are like 5,000-year chunks. The first was power led by women. And the next one was by men. And the next one was by women. And the one that's just over was by men. And in fact, that era was over on December 12th, 2012. Men don't know it. So they don't like it. They don't know what's going on. They're fussing and fuming against it, but it's now time for the women to stand up, not because they are going to be the leaders, but because it's now time for men and women to lead together. And that's the clan mother told me the whole tradition behind that. So how do you do this? I'm going to read you, I actually identified, when I put these all on the wall, identified 24 different ways that this kind of peacemaking happens. It's like, if you want to know how to make bread, you get out the recipe for how to make bread. If you want to do this kind of peacemaking, here is the recipe for it. And I'm only going to give you half the recipe because of time here. All 24 of them constitute chapter 17 in the book, if you want to read the book. And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I'm just going to read these little bullets. And I'd like you to, as you hear them, I'd like you to see if any of them click for you. And you go like, well, I can do that. Or I did that when I worked in this arena. Or I think I'm doing something like that right now. In which case you might just be able to call yourself a peacemaker. So close your eyes for a few minutes. I'll read you the first half of this recipe. Be awake when the opportunity presents itself. Never lose sight of your goal and never get attached to how you get there. Do not use violence of any kind, including to yourself. Work simultaneously at the individual and the systems level. Pace yourself. Make a little peace, make a little dinner. Every day, revisit the wisdom of and your willingness to continue this work. Operate from unconditional caring, not from sentimentality. No pity here. Making a difference in the world might be your primary form of compensation. If you need money to do your work, be creative about sourcing it. The amount of outside pressure you may feel from those that disapprove of your work may be great. Meet it with a greater amount of inner resolve, integrity, and grit. So there's half the recipe ingredients right there for you. So who could do this kind of peacemaking? Well, clearly all 15 women in this book did it. I have chapter 18 in the book where I'm asking readers, and I did the audio book. I'm asking the readers and the listeners to turn in their stories of peacemaking to me, including you, in case you are beginning to realize that you may be a peacemaker, but you never called yourself that before. And it can be done by kindergartners. It can be done by 80-year-olds. It can be done from a human to an animal. It can be done from a human to Mother Earth. There's all sorts of people that can, and entities that can combine together to make this kind of peace. But I wanted to know how I could actually bring about this peacemaking. So I decided I was going to go work with high school kids. So I've been working in 2 high schools, one in my own town in Paonia, and the other in the town of Crestone, Colorado. And the requirement is that the kids have to read at least 10 of these stories and reflect on why that is peacemaking and how the woman went about it. And then they have to listen to some information from me that clarifies what this kind of peacemaking is and isn't. And then they have to go do an act of peacemaking. And when they do it, they all get a certificate just like this from the National Peace Academy. And for instance, the Paonia School that I worked with, there was a grant out there that had never been used. The grant was asked for in the name of elders in the community because they felt undervalued, underseen. And the kids that I worked with decided to have not interviews, because that's like this, but conversations with these elders. And they videoed the conversations and then they showed them at our local movie theater. And it was, let me tell you, they realized that both the kids and the elders felt under-recognized. But by the end of these videos, the community knew about all of them. And there were 16 different interviews that happened. It was really beautiful to see. The kids down in Crestone chose as their peacemaking act to teach the 4th and 5th graders a form of mediation that I taught to them. So the 4th and 5th graders are mediators, but by the way, the high schoolers learned it at the same time too. So Rita, I think we're pretty close to the end. And let's see what the next slide. Oh, this is the pamphlet that was passed out when the Paonia kids interviewed the elders. So I'm just throwing it out there to you. Here's my contact information. By the way, if you want a book, you can go to the email at the bottom, the Facebook, barbechamblisauthor.com, and you can order the book right off of there. You can also order, if you go down a little bit further on the webpage, you can order the audiobook, and there's an ebook should you want it. If you have any questions you want to ask me, and by the way, if we go to the next slide, if any of you want to submit a story of peacemaking, I'm right now I'm about collecting stories that are like 2 or 3 page stories. Not so much 20 or 30 pages as in this book, because I don't have enough time in front of me to do all that. But if you know of it, of active peacemaking somebody has done and stuck with and gone through the tough parts of it and has made a huge difference, you can tell me that story. Or if you're about to do it or you're doing one, please, please submit your story to me. And thank you for the time.
Does anyone have a quick question for Barb? You can unmute and
Tammy has one, I think.
Oh, there now I'm able to unmute. I don't have a question, but I just want to say, big kudos to you, Barb. I am so touched by your work and your stories, and what a powerhouse you are.
Mm.
Like, I could listen to this another 2 hours, seriously. It's
Well, thank you.
really, your work is spectacular. So I'm just, yeah, love it. Thank you.
Well, if you really want to be mesmerized and uplifted, read the stories. These
Yeah.
women are so phenomenal, and they're so much like you and me.
Yeah.
And they just took a path, they saw something floating by and did it, and you go like, wow, like you don't read this book very fast. You need to ruminate or chew on or delight in or feel gratitude for every woman in the book.
Yeah. And can I also say, I love not only that you've done it with the women's stories, but now you're also transferring a lot of these skills to high school and younger kids. I mean, that's brilliant and so needed. And so just bless you, bless you, bless you.
Well, the National Peace Academy and I decided that it's really hard at my age to teach high school, especially through COVID, right? I mean, I had no idea what a gap there was, but I love doing it, but it wasn't the most efficient thing for me to do. So I'm now just working up a curriculum so that the we're going to teach teachers so that they
Wonderful.
can do it, which is way more efficient than me running 5 hours between 2 towns and things like that. But thank you, Tammy, for those compliments very much.
We will have a lot of conversations in Costa Rica,
Costa
no
Rica.
doubt.
And the first the National Peace University was put in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm interested in going there to see if they want guest speakers or something like that. But the other thing I've discovered is the Rotary clubs have 7 peace universities all over the world. And I've just now been the Rotary Club started asking me to speak. So, yeah. Okay.
I have a question too. This has really been so inspiring, and I'm so grateful for your contribution and just you're doing it, like just taking it on and doing it. And so as I'm listening to what you were talking about is happening in schools, I'm wondering for myself here in North Carolina, if I were to reach out to schools to try to engage and build a peace awareness and peace conscious peacemaking in area high schools near me, what type of resources would be available and where would I start? I mean, it's something that I do talk about, but I'm just really curious about the program that you have as well, and how if there's a curriculum or something that we aspiring peace builders can do right where we are to support particularly middle school and high school aged youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking what I did with these high schoolers and this book right here is so subtle that it might not be where I would start. So what I did, I've taught over 500 kids that are in 4th and 5th grade and then middle school and high school, how to actually be mediators. And there was a 2nd grade teacher who just handed me her discovery about how to do this. And it's so much fun and it's such a trick that it actually teaches you how to listen to both sides of the story and then brainstorm ideas and then go like, oh, look, you've got a resolution here. That would be where I would start, I think, in especially the lower schools, elementary and middle, and that hopefully I'll have that curriculum ready if you want. And then one of the most powerful forms of this is restorative justice. So when kids get into high school, often they do what I call a wink of an eye stupid move, learning what they should and shouldn't do. And an example I can give you very quickly here is a young man in our community pocketed the money. He worked in a video store and he pocketed the money that came in for fines. And the owner of the video store came to me and said, this is not a crime that should go to the police, but it's a crime that needs to stop. And so we gathered 4 community members, the perpetrator, you could call it, and his mother, and the store owner and her manager. And we talked about the impact of that crime on the fabric of the community. And the 4 community members are there to help rebuild it. And it was such a beautiful, for instance, the community members realized that this kid was the main support in the house. Also realized the kid wasn't doing well in school because he couldn't see the board. So they all just divvied up enough money for an eye appointment and some classes. And then when this kid was doing community service, they'd see him on the street and say, how's it going? And he'd go like, well, pretty good, but my truck broke down. And they'd go like, get in my truck. I'll go do this community service with you. So, and it's such a powerful way. And there are curriculums for that out there, Becky.
That's
probably
I'm
one of
really
the
curious, particularly for middle school where I am. And I think of youth who succumb to peer pressure and do something that they know is not right, but they do something that is, at the expense of someone else. And what should a parent do? Should the parent reach out to the parent of the child, and it can get more kind of well, I think it gets more presenced in a conscious way. And so if, it's just, I'm just very curious about this topic, particularly to help those situations, especially in schools that are very punitive, where
Yeah.
they're punishing kids really, severely, kicking them out of school for a day and that kind of thing. Like what?
Which then
restorative.
just makes you sit alone and either get angry or lonely.
Yeah.
So very quickly, Becky, I'll tell you that a mother came to me with a middle schooler and she said, my daughter's being really snarky. Could you work with her? And I said, sure. She called up that night. She said, could you work with the whole group of girls? They're all snarky. And I said, sure. And the next day, the principal called me and said, could you work with the whole student body? And I said, yes, we could do that. So I took some kids off campus and taught them this process. And then we brought them back and they were out in the playgrounds doing it. But what we realized is nobody knew the language we were talking. So the principal said, can you train the whole school? So I trained the teachers. The parents came because they'd never learned anything like that. We trained the lunchroom ladies. We trained the bus drivers. We trained everybody and we just called it a Peace Place school. And it's not that hard to do. Yeah.
That is so, imagine if schools had that, in many places, like what the country would be like then.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I want to continue conversation with you offline, but we could talk like Tammy said, we could listen to you for hours with these stories. It's amazing.
By the way, Becky, tell me where in North Carolina you live.
I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, in
Okay.
the capital, in the center of the state.
So I have an 86-year-old brother in Chapel Hill that I come to visit.
Oh,
So
man, we have to
maybe
get
we'll
together when you come. That's only 40 minutes. I would
I
love
know.
to. That would be fabulous.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to put Rita back up here and
Do our closing.
Thank you so much, World Unity Week, Becky, for your hosting, Annie for coming, and Tammy, and Barb, thank you for again presenting this piece of work, which is, I know, making a difference in our part of Colorado, and it's going to go global with this program.
Let's hope.
Streaming.
Let's hope. There are a lot of stories out there that come in. So too.
Yes, so thanks so much. Good to see everyone, and peace be with all.
Do we have a closing song?
I think we
Or are we over time?
yeah, we'll delay that for now.
okay.
Okay.
All right. I'll stop the live stream then. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
There we go.